We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Hi, hello. It is Pod Maverick. It is after dark since it is 10:40 locally here in Texas, in DFW specifically for me. As you could tell with me talking, no Kirk Anderson tonight. It is just me, Josh Bowe, one of the editors over at Mavs Moneyball.com, one of the co-hosts of Pod Maverick. We are here with a first night of free agency edition here. Without Kirk, we've got staffer Matthew Phillips joining us from a secure location. We appreciate Matthew joining us. Kind of spur of the moment. Kirk is out of town with family travel. I asked if anyone wanted to record, and Matthew was like, "Yeah, I could do it." So we're here. Matthew, how are you doing?
I am very good. I'm excited about, obviously, the Mavs making a move on the first night of free agency with Naji Marshall, who is a very interesting player that should help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Me and Kirk have been doing these podcasts at the end of the first night of free agency ever since we've been recording. And I want to say the first one we ever did was the first night of 2019 free agency, which was very, very different. It was forever ago. It was literally 5 years ago, but it feels like 30 years ago, especially when you consider the vibes. So the first night of free agency is not over, but for the most part, we feel like we're in a good spot to record. I was kind of waiting to see if we would get some more news, but I think things have toned down enough. We definitely have enough to talk about. Matthew, of course, mentioned the Mavericks signing Naji Marshall, their first move of free agency. Adrian Wojnarowski reported that signed a 3-year, $27 million deal. So on average, we're talking about $9 million per season. Of course, the real details, it might start lower and then have annual raises, but on average, it'll be about $9 million a season. We don't know for sure the details, but we're going to assume it's going to take up part of the MLE, which I think is what ESPN's Tim McMahon is reporting, which also means that the Mavericks are probably parting ways with Derrick Jones Jr. because of his weird agent scenario that he moved to Clutch last Wednesday, and apparently there's a rule in the NBA where you can't sign contracts or agree or negotiate or something for 15 days after you sign with a new agent. And so that kind of clouded things, I think, for the Mavericks, and they decided to be a little proactive, not wait on those 15 days, because that's kind of a long time. I mean, we would be into the end of next week, or early next week, I think, before those 15 days would be up, and that's an eternity in free agency time. So the Mavericks went ahead with their plan B. got Naji Marshall on a really reasonable contract. If you follow, a lot of smart NBA people are basically saying this is the best deal of free agency so far. Hard to argue with it. And then we're going to talk about that. And then also, as another update, we decided to go live now because it seems that the Klay Thompson deal will not be announced until sometime tomorrow. That's the latest from Wojnarowski at ESPN. So we kind of felt like safe. I don't think the Klay Thompson news is going to break while we're recording or after we record until sometime in the morning. So we'll record again tomorrow once that news comes down, which I would expect it to be sometime tomorrow. I don't think it's going to linger past tomorrow. So we're here now. So Matthew, as you said, you like the Naji Marshall move. We kind of talked about it in Slack. I think we might both be on the same wavelength regarding this move. So give me kind of your first initial thoughts on Naji Marshall being a Dallas Maverick right now.
Okay, so the first thing is I think it's a continuation of a trend for the Mavs in general, since as a contrast from the previous regime, the Nico regime now, the Mavs are active and they are super willing to pivot, kind of like the cast of Friends. They pivot, because if you look at it like the old school, the Mavs, how many people did we lose over the years by waiting on one free agent or another? It was, they pretty famously had the deal with Andre Iguodala, and then they waited because they thought they were going to get Dwight Howard. They've had multiple other deals, and I firmly believe that if you go back and it's the old front office, the Mavs would have waited on Derrick Jones Jr. and just assumed that they were going to be able to sign him on the 11th when he's free to negotiate after his agency change, and then if that didn't work out, just kind of shrug their shoulders and be like, oh, well, what can we do? And I think it's good for the Mavs to kind of, they do things on their own timeline now. Like they're not going to be, jilted at the altar. They're going to make things happen. And that's an important thing, one. And then two, you get into the more important stuff with Naji as a player. Naji's a little bigger than Derrick Jones Jr. They're like, DJJ obviously plays because of his athleticism and his length. He can play bigger than he is, but he's also very slight as far as like he probably weighs a solid 25 pounds less than Naji. And I think that's an important thing because if you look at the Mavs, like as much as they are bigger than they used to be with Gafford and Lively and PJ, the only person that really should get power forward minutes that's on the roster next year is PJ, and then obviously Maxey.
Yeah.
And being that reliant on Maxey is just, Maxey was a good player for a long time. I don't want to come off as a hater of Maxey. Like I really, really enjoy Maxey, but he is not someone at this stage of his career that I think that it makes sense for a team with championship aspirations to be counting on to be good when it matters, because you're going to get basically 17 good games a year. You don't know when they're going to come, and asking that they be 17 good playoff games is probably asking for too much. So Naji's added size and his ability to do some extra things off the dribble. He's a little better off the dribble than Jones. He can pass a little better. He's a little bigger, so he's a little better as a rebounder. Like there's a lot of skills that he has. They call him the Knife. I know if you look him up, like you go through nicknames, it's not quite as cool as Airplane Mode, but he's basically a Swiss Army knife, and that there's just a whole lot of things that he can do. He's not necessarily like a star or superstar in that he can't do anything like he's not Luka or anything. Like he's not just elite, but he is like he's not bad at anything essentially. If his shooting from last year is real, before that he had been bad at shooting, but he did shoot I think 38.4% last year on threes, and that was without a Luka bump. So with the shot creation abilities from Luka and Kyrie, it's very possible that he shoots better than that, and so that just makes him a really exciting pickup because he can also take a lot of the point of attack defensive duties that Derrick Jones Jr. had last year.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm totally with you on the first thing you said when you talked about kind of the planning part of it. Famously, if you guys are bored as you're waiting for more free agency news to hit up, find our podcast from the first night of free agency 2019. Me and Kirk Definitely a lot spicier. I know that we've gotten some criticism over the last like 12 months that we're a little bit more low energy than we used to be. And it's totally understandable because I am getting closer to the age of 40 and we both have small children. And naturally, I'm going to have less energy than when I was single and in my, I guess I was still in my 20s back then. No, I would just end. I turned 30 in 2019, just to give you an idea of how old I am. So had a lot more energy back then, and had a lot more room to be disgusted with the process. And it's really funny to go back and listen because it really is a night and day difference when you think about how the Mavericks have been doing business for the last maybe 18 to 24 months. You're absolutely right. They would have waited on Jones, and they would have just waited on Klay, and they would have hoped that those two just kind of worked out and then been left with potentially nothing. And with the Mavericks looked at it and were like, okay, we can't do anything with Jones for like, another 7 to 10 days, it feels like. Let's get someone else that we feel comfortable in, that they seem to have on their list, because there were links to Marshall from NBA reporters before free agency started. Plays a similar position, plays a similar role in terms of being, a wing defender, potential point of attack defender, role player, and also, 1 year younger than Derrick Jones Jr. He's probably going to come in at cheaper, $9 million a season. I think that might be cheaper than what Jones is getting. I think the Mavericks were anticipating, even with a potential Klay Thompson move, that Jones might, if let's say the agent thing wasn't going to happen or didn't happen, and they were able to negotiate and sign with him whenever. It was reported that he might take up the full MLE. So there's a chance that not only do they get a little bit, 1 year younger, but they also got something cheaper. And there's a chance that Naji Marshall is a better player than Derrick Jones Jr. I had the take on Twitter and in our Slack. I personally think that he's a better player than Derrick Jones Jr. No disrespect to Jones at all, who was fantastic last season, and no disrespect to any Mavs fans who are a bit bummed out because Jones was absolutely incredible to watch in Dallas. Just veteran signing to do what he did, the way he played. He was fun. Like, fans should feel bummed to lose a player like that. Like, he's a sentimental guy because he was part of a very special run, and he made a lot of fun plays, and he did a lot of things that the team needed. He boosted their athleticism in a way that the fans have been desperate for years. Like, absolutely. Like, you should feel a little bummed that Jones is no longer on the team. But like, having said that, I just think Marshall might be a better overall player. Now, there's some things that Jones does better. Jones can rim run, the vertical game with him, being able to finish in the pick and roll, being able to finish in transition, being able to finish above the rim. Those are all things he have over Marshall. But Marshall is like no slouch. He's not a stiff. He is, 6'6", 6'7", depending where you look. He's got a 7'1" wingspan. He is bigger, like Matthew said. He's stronger, so he doesn't have the bounciness. I think I saw somewhere his vertical is about 10 inches less. But it's not like we're talking about some floor-bound stiff here. Like, he's still a pretty good athlete, long arms, might not have the same point of attack defending juice that Jones had, but still very, very capable of doing it. Go watch some possessions against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in their first round playoff series. Watch some possessions against him against James Harden. Can he guard maybe the water bug point guards like the Tyrese Maxey, those types of speed point guards, as well as a Jones? Maybe not, but you're not losing that much. He's not such a downgrade that I think it's going to be this noticeable, precipitous drop. And the Mavericks have enough athletic defenders around, like PJ Washington, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford. Oh, and they did just pick up Grimes from the Pistons, who also projects to be a pretty solid point of attack defender if they can get him healthy and right. That I think they're going to be just fine. And I think you could honestly look at it as, the two players that have gone out so far since free agency started, Jones and Tim Hardaway Jr., the two players that have come in, Grimes and Marshall, you might argue the Mavericks so far have upgraded their roster in the aggregate. I don't think that that's a necessarily spicy or hot take. So, and this is even with, even if the 38% Marshall shot last season from three is a fluke, he was 34, about 35% as a rookie, then 20, then 30 his next 2 seasons. And then last season he was 38. So if you think the 38 is a fluke, he does enough defensively and he does enough off the bounce a little that he has more than Jones. That I think that it's going to be a net neutral at worst. Now, of course, we've seen moves that look great on paper. Grant Williams last year did not work out. There are things that we cannot predict that go into this. It's not just all the on paper stuff. There has to be a chemistry factor to it. Personalities have to mesh. So absolutely, this could be worse than we're anticipating. But from where we're sitting right now, it's a home run move, and I don't really see potential downsides other than the stuff that we just can't anticipate right now, chemistry and how the team kind of coheses together with the personalities and stuff like that. But everyone I've seen from the New Orleans side of it is like the Mavericks are getting a dog. All the smart players I've seen is they're getting an absolute bulldog, someone that really grinds hard on the defensive end, and I think has some room to grow on the offensive end, especially with the space Luka provides.
Yeah, absolutely, he does there. As you know, I'm a really big fan of the draft combine results as far as both the anthro and the strength and agility. So, just some information on Naji. One, and this is something that always interests me. He had the third largest hands in his draft, and which he was also the same draft as Josh Green, who Josh Green had the second smallest hands behind only Tyrell Terry, who was also drafted by the Mavs. Which hand size is something, to me it's always been interesting because it does allow you some extra things. Like I think part of Josh Green's problems, which I didn't realize the hand size thing for him was until I was looking at the combine results today after the Mavs signed Naji. If you look at like some of the stuff with him not being able to finish, with him losing the ball going up and everything, it makes sense when you realize that he has little tiny hands. And so the only two people that had bigger hands than Naji in that draft were Udoka Azubuike, the really big center that was drafted by Utah to hopefully be a facsimile of Gobert, and Xavier Tillman. So he's got just massive hands to go with the 7'1" wingspan. He had a 35-inch vertical, which is not great by NBA like wing athletic standards, but it's not like Reese Shea or somebody like that, or Ajinta that the Mavs drafted this year, where it's like, man, I jumped higher than that when I was in high school. Like this is,
Yeah,
it's
at
not
least
like
with,
that.
Ajenka also had like a neutral wingspan too. He's got a 7'1" wingspan, so that helps make
Yeah,
up
so he
for
does
the
that.
vertical.
He does a lot of stuff, and I think defensively, I think the strengths are a little different. Like Jones
Yeah,
takes a backseat to literally no one in the NBA in athleticism and quick twitch athleticism. Like he is, there's a line in Suits where Mike Ross is talking to Rachel, and he's like, "I'm 99th percentile and all of this." She's like, "Why weren't you the 100th? There is no 100th." Jones is 99th percentile athlete. Like that guy is as athletic as it gets. Like all of the quick twitch athlete stuff, he does that stuff as well as anybody possibly can. And Marshall isn't quite that, but with the size also helps with the defense, especially with the rules the way they ended up being towards the end of last year.
yes,
He can
yes,
body people a little more. And also with the Mavs, the way they play defense, like the Luka blow by score was a big thing on ESPN and everything. And Luka did get blown by a lot, and I'm not really trying to argue about that one way or another. But part of the Mavs defensive scheme right now is for their perimeter defenders to beat up on people, and if they get beat, it's not the end of the world, because the Mavs just always have such elite rim protection between Lively and Gafford, and also PJ and or whoever else they have with the secondary rim protection, which has always been a weakness, but they have now. So if he is out and he gets beat by some of the super quick guards, which the fact of the matter is, even as elite as Jones was defensively last year, which he is, which he absolutely was, those guys beat people off the dribble. Like it's just a fact of life. Like obviously, if you go back and watch the Mavs Oklahoma City series, Shea was beating Derrick Jones Jr. off the dribble a bunch. Like, and that's not at all meant to say anything bad. Like his ability that the Mavs didn't double all that much, like that they stayed and they basically played Shea straight up, even though he had an absolutely elite series and was quite frankly the best player on the court. It it it's not like if you put Jones on somebody, there's just zero chance he gets beat off the dribble. Like those guys, those elite off the ball guys, like they just beat people off the dribble. Like it's just a thing that happens. And so I think that's where Naji's extra size and strength will really help. And again, I can't stress enough how much like I've been very concerned going into next year that I'm like, the Mavs have 20 minutes a night of power forward that somebody needs to play, because I also think there's a pretty good chance the Mavs trade Maxey in the next couple of days. And I really don't want to go into next season with the plan being, hey, we have to rely on Maxey to play, 70 games and 25 minutes a night and has to be at a high level at all times. Like, that's just, the West is going to be an absolute monster next year. Like, I believe going into at the beginning of the season, going into it, the West next year is the best conference we've ever had going into a season. Like, it's just, the Grizzlies will be back. You have all the same teams. No teams other than maybe the Clippers have gotten noticeably worse. And I mean, like, there's going to be some teams that legitimately, like, not lying to themselves, believe themselves to be a championship contender that are in the play-in and don't even make, like, and when I say in the play-in, like, don't even make the actual playoffs from the play-in. And the Mavs, as great a season as they had, and as super hyper and very positive as I am on their outlook going forward, there is at least some chance that happens going into next year, just because of how good everyone else is. And so it's important to me that they stay young, and two, that they keep trying to get better, which this move signals to me that they are still trying to get better. Like, they're still actively working. And so, I mean, that's really all I've got on him. If you want to move over and talk about the potential Klay or anything else that we do, we can do that as well.
Sure, but I think we need to add a little bit more because we did get some news just popped in. Shams, sorry, I can't pronounce these guys' names. I'm really sorry. But over at the Athletic, he just reported that the Clippers and Derrick Jones Jr. are come to an agreement on a 3-year, $30 million deal, which is curious in two ways. Because one, the money's not that much different for Marshall, although Marshall is $3 million cheaper total, which is like, in the average, it's not that bigger. It's $9 million a year versus $10 million a year. So it's practically the same money. And also interesting because we've been talking about this agent thing was going to hold it up. And about an hour after the Mavericks signed Marshall, we've got this agreement. Well, it's all agreements right now. It's not officially signing yet. But now we've got Jones agreeing to a deal an hour later when the reporting was that it was going to be maybe prolonged to wait on Jones because of this agent thing. So does Jones signing for basically the same contract with the Clippers an hour later change how this feels for you? Now, for me personally, not a ton, because we're only working with the information that we have at the time. And if they thought that it was going to be prolonged with Jones, they have to make the move when they can. And also, I do think Marshall is going to be potentially a better player for the Mavericks than Jones, even though I was a big fan of Jones and he obviously was a huge part of their finals run. I just think it might work out a little bit better. Does this news with Jones going to the Clippers for 3 years for $30 million change anything for you?
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
This news confuses me because I didn't think that was allowed.
I know.
All I've heard for the last little bit is
is it Shams just getting ahead of himself, or he will tweak the deals as soon as possible. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, he has to because of the him and Woj battle to be the ultimate insider. But so my first thought is the Mavs have the chance to do something really funny. Is they could kidnap Derrick Jones Jr. and lock him in a room until he signs with the Mavs just to make up for the DeAndre Jordan situation. Like, that does surprise me a little bit because I feel like I honestly feel like had the Mavs known that deal was out there for Derrick Jones Jr., they probably go with Derrick Jones Jr. Just because he's already been here, and a lot of what the Mavs did last year too was just overwhelming teams with athleticism, which obviously, as I mentioned earlier, he is as good of an athlete as anyone in the world, and so that's part of that. I personally, I really like Naji. Like, I like his potential. I like the potential of seeing people that have not played with Luka play with Luka and see what chances there are for him to help them and put them in better situations. I don't love it when everyone just gives Luka all of the credit for any improvement that anyone on the roster makes. I don't think that's fair to the other players. But I do enjoy when you see, because there is a chance, because Luka and Kyrie is as much shot creation as any backcourt ever. And so when you have them, it makes sense to try out and see what people get a potential Luka bump. Because when you look at it, like, Jones was, I know he could have gotten a little more, but Jones was a minimum salary player not playing with Luka. Like, he was available, like the Mavs signed him for essentially the minimum. And Najee isn't. Like, Najee has value before Luka. And so I do think that there's a possibility that once Najee gets here next year that he averages something like 12, 5, and 3, and we're just all blown away and like just utterly shocked. But yeah, that does surprise me that Derrick Jones Jr. is gone for that amount now. And I think it's a little revisionist um, to go back and, like, if the Mavs assumed, hey, we can't negotiate until the 11th, and then I'm really curious to see how this comes out. I'm curious to see if this comes. I don't know if tampering is the right term, but I'm curious to see if any kind of discipline comes from this, because this also goes to the other thing.
Yeah, I'm putting this comment.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, so I wonder if that, I'll be honest, I'm not a great CBA person, and I don't know the rules super tight.
I don't believe that's actually correct, though. And the reason I say I understand that, but like, I kind of think it's like someone with an attorney. I don't think teams are allowed to directly negotiate with people who have representation. I could be wrong. Like, I'm not remotely pretending to be an expert on that, but it is just a very strange thing. And also, I mean, the rules as they apply to Clutch and LeBron, and they're not always equitably applied, is how we'll word that, because it's illegal for a active player to have ownership interest in an agency. And without pretending like I have more knowledge than I do, I would bet that there is some way that LeBron is tied to the financial interest of the Clutch Sports Agency at some point in time.
Yeah, I've also got that there's obviously that big part of it. There's also a point. One of our pretty long time follower of mine, Matt Sullivan, just tweeted at me. Not even sure if he's listening right now, if he's in the comments, but a big supporter of the site and our show. He made a good point that I just thought that I didn't think of, is Jones potentially wants to start. And if the Mavericks get Klay Thompson, Jones is no longer a starter. So maybe that goes into it, because Marshall comes in here knowing he's going to probably be coming off the bench. Maybe the Mavericks feel like that's better. Maybe Jones feels like, I just started for a finals team. I don't want to go back to the bench. Clippers just lost Paul George. I'm going to start there. I'm going to go be a starter. That feels like a pretty good point there. So maybe this is more smoke that the Klay Thompson deal might be happening. But I can understand that, because, Jones just has the best season of his career, just helps the team get to the NBA finals, plays a pivotal role in getting to the finals, then being asked to come off the bench. That's tough. These guys have pride. So I could see him being like, you know what, even if it's about the same amount of money, I'll take a little bit more, because he should take as much money as he can right now. He absolutely should. So maybe he's like, get a little bit more money. I get to start. I'm going to go do that. And maybe the Mavericks were like, this could maybe be easier for the locker room if we bring in Marshall, who doesn't have expectations of starting, already been a bench player in New Orleans, knows what's going on, that kind of knows the deal. And maybe if they know that Klay is in the bag and he's going to be starting, maybe that just makes it easier. I don't know. There's a lot that goes on to this stuff besides just the dollars, and like there's just so much more to this than we'll ever know, because there's so much that goes on to it behind the scenes besides just money and numbers and all that stuff. But I think that feels like a pretty good logical reasoning there.
I will point this out. I will always love Derrick Jones Jr. I enjoyed watching him this year. Like, he was a ton of fun. He was obviously the finishing portion of the most viewed play on social media in Mavs history, that the play against Utah, which I was like 10 feet away from in real time when it happened, where Luka dives and gets the ball and gets it to Kyrie, and then Kyrie throws the lob to him. Like, I think that summed him up. Like, he was a lot of fun. I have no ill will whatsoever towards that man. Like, I'm a huge fan.
No way.
I wish him the absolute best in Los Angeles. And it's just sometimes, things aren't meant to be as far as staying together for a long time. And that's okay. And you are absolutely correct about he should take the most money he could, because, I mean, it sounds like, what's the difference between $27 and $30 million? Well, it's $3 million. Like, that is more than a lifetime of earnings for a lot of people. And he is not, obviously he is generationally wealthy by normal people standards, but this isn't LeBron, or someone that's made, this isn't one of the people that's made, 500-600 million over his career. I think this contract is more than his previous career earnings combined. So it makes sense for him. Like, he should get absolutely all of the money that he can, and I am happy for him to do it. And I would have been happy for him to do it here. I'm not upset by that at all. So if you want to, on the Klay stuff, I don't want to talk about it like it's a done deal, but like just the idea of it. Klay is still, like, even now, the absolute apex predator of off-ball shooters, of high-volume off-ball shooters ever in the history of the NBA. Like, that guy gets up shots, and the most important thing about that as far as the Mavs go, obviously, one, he does make them. But two, you talk about gravity. Like, I mean, Steph's obviously the peak gravity guy in the history of basketball. But it's important when you watch a lot of Mavs games, you see how open people are, which part of that is because of how great Luka and Kyrie are at creating shots for people. But part of that is also because people just don't respect any of the Mavs shooters. Klay will not be as open as, Maxey or Derrick Jones Jr. or even PJ, people like that, because the defense will account for him, which that should have the desired effect of, one, he'll obviously make a lot of, if he ends up here, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse and assume that that's happening, but if he ends up here, not only would he, one, make a lot of shots and the Mavs would get a lot of points that way, he would also have the effect of opening up the floor a lot for Luka and Kyrie. And I mean, like, the Mavs lost the finals on offense. Obviously, Klay would have some defensive questions. He's not what he once was on that end. That would require some extra effort from Luka and Kyrie on that end to make up for the loss there. And there's lots of things that can go from there. But the offense, if PJ can keep his shot, like if his shot is, if it stabilizes at, if he becomes like a 37-ish% 3-point shooter, which I am extremely concerned about the whole they're reworking his shot like that. The last shot the Mavs reworked was Dennis Smith Jr., and they reworked it to the point to where he's a minimum player. But other than that, I mean, like, if PJ can stabilize as a 37-ish% 3-point shooter, which is, I think, roughly what his career average is at this point, and then you have Luka, Kyrie, Klay, PJ, and then obviously you'll have a rim runner out there at all times. Especially if Luka and Kyrie are healthy. Man, that is just, I don't see how anyone stops it. Like, that is an offense that I just don't see how you stop. He's a supersized version. He's a souped up version of Tim when everything was right with Tim.
Yeah. The weird thing, and I've been making this point today on Twitter, and I tried to make it with Kirk when we recorded last week, is, Klay's last game, obviously, that we've seen him play was awful. He was 0 for 10 from the floor, didn't score any points. They lose a play-in game, so they don't even make the playoffs. Like, just terrible. And just kind of summed up a really weird season for him, where he didn't start every game for the first time since his rookie season. So very, he started every game even when he came back from the ACL Achilles combo. Like, they didn't even bring him off the bench after that to ease him back in. Like he's been a starter his whole life, won 4 titles, been an all NBA player, been an all-star. Obviously last season was difficult for him. And if you go to the Golden State reporting from the Athletic and some other sources, they're saying that a lot of, his consternation with potentially leaving the Warriors is just how difficult it was in terms of him trying to be the player that he thought he was, trying to come to terms with the player that he physically is now. The Warriors trying to figure that out on the fly and in the public sphere. Klay apparently was not a big fan of answering questions like every single practice, every single game about, so do you want to come off the bench? Do you want to start? He was just tired of that. It sounds like. So, I get it. If you just kind of followed, I don't want to say this as a negative insult because I don't watch every single Warriors games either. Like it's hard to watch if you are locked into a team. It is very hard to watch any other team play during the regular season. Even for the people that do this as a full-time job, and I do not do this as a full-time job. I have an office job during the day. It is very hard to watch all the teams. It is just really hard. So you go off of what you can watch and you listen to smart people that are watching and you just do the best that you can. But if you just kind of covered the national perspective of Klay, it was very easy to see how last season and his time since he's come back from injury just to fall into this, washed narrative that he's not there anymore. He's washed up. He's kind of a has-been. And to some degree, I'm not trying to deny that he's fallen off as a player. Clearly he has. Just look at his 2-point percentage. He's come back from injury. It's fallen off tremendously since he was hurt. Which shows a lot about like where he is physically. Like he's just not there physically. He's not the same defender. He was an all NBA defender before he got hurt, or he's not that anymore. That's not to say he's completely terrible. He's just different now. He has to guard bigger guys. He used to be a point of attack demon in his heyday. I don't think he's that anymore. But I feel like we just the narrative around him just went too far in that direction of him being washed up. And I just don't think he is, because you just cannot tell me a player is washed. In the 3 years he's played since the injuries, he is averaging about 10 3-point attempts per game and making about 40% of those threes. Like, yes, I know that he's physically not the same. Yes, I know that he had issues adjusting to new roles in Golden State. Yes, I know he had some dreadful stretches where he just did not look like himself. Yes, I know that the defense is not there. But in the aggregate, he is still one of the most, like you said, Matthew, still one of the most elite shooters in the NBA. And you cannot deny that. Even with that awful playing game performance he had, even with some of the ups and downs he's had since he came back from his 2 devastating leg injuries. Yes, he's 34. Yes, technically, physically, he's only going to get worse from here. Production-wise, 40% on 10 threes a game, 20 points per game. That's what he's been doing the last 3 years. Pretty damn good for a player that is supposedly washed. When you think about what the Mavericks need, like you said, they need shooting. Yes, ideally, in an ideal world, they would get a wing that can do a little creation, they can do a little shooting, can do a little everything while still maintaining a high level on defense. You just named a player that every single team in the NBA wants, the most desirable player in the NBA. A wing.
That's Paul George.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's what it is.
Right. And those players are hard to get. So you have to play the board in front of you. So when people are like, well, no, they need this. They need a wing that can create and shoot and play defense. I'm like, you're talking about a potential all NBA player and all-star. That is just with the Mavericks constraints as they are right now, with where they are financially and with their picks, it's just very difficult for them to get that player. They should totally try to get that player. They should exhaust every resource to get that player. I still think that they will, even if they do end up bringing in Klay Thompson, because they're going to need to get that player eventually. Because Kyrie and Klay are not going to play forever. And Luka is going to be 30 years old when those two guys are presumably on their way out of the league or tapering down. So they still need to get that player, and they still need to do what they can. But you just have to play the board that's in front of you. And Klay is easily the best shooter available on the market. This was a team that lost the NBA Finals, not because necessarily it's defense, but because they could not make a shot. Yes, I understand that Luka and Kyrie were covered one-on-one, and they needed someone that could dribble a little bit against that. But they still needed players to make open shots because they shot poorly on their open shots in the finals. So even with the way the team's regarding Luka and Kyrie, they still missed open opportunities from their role players. They need some more shooting. It's a hard act to balance because they went from a team that was all offense, all like they had to make threes or they lost pre 2020, this 2024 team, pre-finals team. Then they draft Lively, they trade for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, they signed Derrick Jones Jr. All of a sudden now they're a team that wins on defense, athleticism, and shooting is their kind of nemesis. They did not shoot well to end the season. They did not necessarily shoot well in the playoffs. They won on their defense and their athleticism, but then they lost in the finals because of shooting. So there has to be a balance. You know what I mean? Like they were going to have to come into this offseason and say, okay, we rectified our athleticism and defensive problems we've had since drafting Luka, but we might have overtuned and now we need more shooting. So can we push the needle back more towards shooting while still having enough defense and athleticism that we don't fall off? Is Klay Thompson the answer to that question? I don't know. But I do know that he's one of the most elite shooters in the NBA. I do know that the Mavericks still have Derek Lively. They still have Daniel Gafford. They still have PJ Washington, and they have Quentin Grimes now. So that's 4 young, youthful, athletic defenders. So it's not like they're throwing that mantra away. They're not throwing away that identity. If they do, again, this is all hypothetical. If they do get Klay Thompson, but I understand that there are concerns. But I feel like it's just shifted so far in the wrong way. And like you said, offensively, Luka, Kyrie, Klay, with a rim runner like Lively, PJ Washington potentially starting also with them. There's a lot to work with there. And yeah, they're going to have to figure some things out defensively. They're going to have to figure some things out with Klay in terms of his role. If he was unhappy with his role in Golden State, is he going to be happy being a number 3 option in Dallas? Because he will absolutely at most be the number 3 option. Yeah, there's some potential drawbacks. They got to figure some stuff out. But considering what's available to the Mavericks and what they can do, it feels like a win to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic there. I don't know. Sorry, I rambled a lot there.
No, you're good. Honestly, again, the thing with that is aside from just 3-point percentage, this is one of my gripes with people is we just look at 3-point percentages, and it's real easy to say one. Klay's 38.7%. Tim was, I don't know, maybe like 37% last year. I don't know exactly what he shot, but you look at certain people, like even Naji is like 38.4%, and there are some people that will just look at those stats like they're on a spreadsheet and just be like, oh, same thing, 38.4, 38.7, the shooting, that's all that matters. One, NBA players have reputations, and everybody in the league knows who Klay Thompson is as a shooter. Like the way teams defended the Mavs would be to just leave that position, the Derrick Jones Jr. spot, like that corner, wide open all the time and in a lot of places. And people just aren't going to do that with Klay. Like that's so one, who he is as a player, the reputation, because I believe if he got those level of shots, he'd shoot like 47%. And then 2, the biggest thing on that too is volume. Volume matters more than the percentage. Like if you shoot, 38% on 2 attempts a game, that means you're making 2 shots every 3 games. Like that's really not that big a deal. That's not a game breaker as far as a defensive scheme. With Klay, obviously, I mean, he's taking nearly 10 threes a game over the last 3 years. And, obviously that's without people just actively leaving him open. So the fact that he can get those shots up, that's what's always made Tim so valuable for the Mavs, is that the Mavs don't have a volume 3-point shooter who just gets looks up like that. And so it really, really helps. And like I said, I don't want to talk about this like it's a done deal. And then the final thing on him too is that he is another of the cooler free throw shooters. Obviously, Kyrie is an elite late game free throw shooter, so the Mavs already have that. But Klay led the league in free throw shooting last year, and the Mavs were obviously a very, very bad free throw shooting team. So he shot 92.7% on free throws last year, which means that obviously the pure shooting skill is still there. Because there's been a lot of research over the years that free throw shooting is a more true representation of shooting skill than 3-point shooting skill is. And I mean, that's just, he's 90.2, 87.9, 92.7 over the last 3 years. So the pure shooting skill is absolutely still there. And then the final thing is, like, so often, like, Tim played hard defensively. Tim tried really hard. He just was in the wrong spot in a lot of places. Even if Klay isn't what he was athletically, he knows what to do defensively. And it's weird to say this because of who Golden State's been for so long. And obviously Draymond is an all-time defender. But I think he's going to a better defensive infrastructure in the current Mavs, especially with what the Mavs ask their perimeter defenders to do, to beat up on people. And if they get beat, it's not necessarily the end of the world as long as they get beat the right ways. Like I think that he's coming to a place that will minimize his defensive weaknesses while maximizing his offensive strengths is probably the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's, obviously Draymond Green is still one of the greatest defensive players in the world. One, it's he's not on the court because you can't rely on him to be on the court because of his suspension issues. So that hurt Klay. Whenever Draymond was off the floor, their defense last season was just terrible. And then two,
Well,
Draymond,
he's always got to choke. He's always got to choke the other team's offense.
Exactly right. Yes, well put. And so, but even when he's on the floor, they still play defense. I think that was a way that was styled after Klay still being who he could be before the injuries. Because Draymond is an elite defender, but he's not necessarily the rim packing kind of defender that like a Derek Lively or Dan Gafford is. Not trying to say they're better. Draymond is obviously like one of the best defensive players in the world, but it's just different type of defensive style that the Warriors play with Draymond and the Mavericks play with their two big rim protectors. So yeah, there is a little bit more ease for the perimeter players because they got those two bigs that can clean up a lot. They have PJ Washington, who's actually a pretty good shot blocker for someone that's 6'7". Look at his shot blocking numbers over the last few years; they're pretty good. Per size or whatever, per inch, per foot or whatever, he stands toe to toe with some other shot blockers in the NBA. So there's that. So yeah, and like you said, there's a lot more funneling to the bigs, so that can help someone who's maybe lost a step or two physically. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We have much more to talk about this if this actually happens. We'll have just as much to talk about if it doesn't happen, because then we have to go to what's next. And if the Mavericks, we're very dead set on this Klay move theoretically, because it's only happening with a sign and trade. So theoretically, that sign and trade could still maybe exist for another player. So we'll have to look and see what else is on the market if Klay does go to the Lakers. See if the Mavericks are willing to part with whatever package they were going to trade for Klay and bring in Klay. Maybe there's another player out there that fits what they want to do. But I haven't really looked at that yet. And I think we've talked for about enough, and I don't think there's any more news that's going to go down tonight. So Matthew, unless you've got do you have any parting points before we wrap up tonight? Because I think I've taked myself out for the evening.
No, I mean, that's honestly, I'm really excited with everything that's going on, and I continue to look forward and hope that the Mavs can continue to improve. But they're going to be a really, really good team next year. It's just sad that the West is going to have probably 12 of the 14 best teams in the NBA.
As it is, and as it always shall be. I swear I don't think I have not been alive when the East was better than the West. Like that era did not happen when I was. Well, I guess I was. I was technically alive during Michael Jordan's run, but I was not a basketball fan back then because I was too little. So it's been a while. My NBA brain has basically always known that the West is always better. So we'll see. So yeah, we'll be back probably tomorrow. Again, Kirk is traveling this week, so I don't think that Kirk is going to be able to record. I don't want him recording on the road and with family and doing all that stuff. So it'll be myself. Maybe it's Matthew Phillips again. Maybe it's someone else from Mavs Moneyball. Maybe it's just me by myself. We'll see what it is. But I appreciate you guys staying up late with us. First night of NBA free agency in the books. Again, the only real news right now is that the Mavericks signed Naji Marshall to a 3-year, $27 million deal. The Clippers have agreed to terms with Derrick Jones Jr. on a 3-year, $30 million deal. So we'll have to see if what we've said about Marshall holds true. And I'm sure there will be Mavs fans comparing those two players' production when things tip off in late October. So we'll just have to see. But so far, those are the only two moves on the first day. We anticipate the Klay Thompson news will come down sometime tomorrow morning or in the afternoon, or at least by the end of tomorrow. So we will be live with that, whether it's to the Mavericks or to the Lakers. We'll be back to talk about it. So again, Josh Bowe for Pod Maverick, also for MavsMoneyball.com. Check the site as we'll have stuff up as free agency continues. Matthew, thanks for joining me on such short notice. Really appreciated talking to you tonight.
Thanks for having me. Everybody have a good night.
Yep. Talk to you guys later, and it'll be tomorrow night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.